would it mean if you dream about lungs?
So it's interesting because we were sent a dream where somebody said, I dreamt twice this week that my husband's aunt had stage 4 lung cancer. She's a new Christian, but she's not baptized yet. And I had this dream twice in 1 week, and that is really, really interesting because a repetitive dream makes you take notice. That's God saying, I want you to take note here.
Confirmation, right?
Confirmation.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that dream in a minute, because it's an interesting dream, and I don't know if you want to tell us a bit about what you think the lungs could mean, and then we can maybe understand what the dream means better.
Yeah. So lungs is part of the respiratory system, and as such, it gets our oxygen into our bloodstream and around our body. In the Bible, the lungs are associated with breath, and breath is associated with spirit. So it's often to do with spiritual things. Just as like when you think about the sea as and the land and the air, then the air is the spiritual, because you're kind of looking up towards the heavens, which is where the ancients believed God dwelled, was up in the sky. So just as the sky is spiritual and looking up towards it, so breath is the spirit of a man, and where the spiritual life is represented by breath. And interestingly, it often gets lungs often, for me at least, pop up as again, it's something that when you, in normal life, you just don't notice that you're breathing, you just do it. So it often pops up when something's wrong, and one of the, well, probably most prominent maladies is to do with smoking. I mean, that's like the legacy of the last century or so. So smoking kind of has two aspects. One is that which goes in, and the other is that which goes out. And often what goes in is kind of a wrong spirit. So if you're dreaming about tobacco or smoking or the dangers of smoking, then that could be to do with something spiritual that's wrong, a spiritually wrong idea, direction, desire, something spiritually that's not right. And it goes in quite quickly. That's the thing, when you have to chew something over, it goes through your mind and swallow it and digest it. But if you breathe something in, it just goes straight into your bloodstream, and it's straight into your flow of life. So you've got to be very careful with things that dreams are to do with smoking. When smoke comes out, so if you're dreaming about somebody, the breath being polluted by tobacco, then it can be to do with offense. I mean, it could be to do something demonic. It's like a horrible, like, if you don't smoke, then somebody else's smoke is really repulsive. So it could be to do with something demonic or something offensive or unclean, an unclean spirit.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So then let's have a chat about the dream, because that makes sense in the context of lung cancer. She's been smoking something, hasn't she?
Yes,
that's often
right.
what lung cancer is related to. It may not be, but I feel like perhaps it's to do with something your mum has believed or taken in a spiritual sense, breathing in cigarette smoke. What do you think that represents then? You'd mentioned it, cigarette smoke would be.
If you're a smoker, it's something you're doing to yourself. So it's a spiritual practice you're doing knowingly.
Yeah.
If it's passive smoking, then it's because you're part of the wrong environment. So you've been in an environment which is spiritually bad for you. So it would be to do with something like that. There's a stage 4 lung cancer is, I don't know a huge amount about this, but I know stage 4 is kind of the last stage of cancer before you die. So stage 4 lung cancer is very, very serious. We also have to think in this dream about the relationship. It's the husband's aunt, right? This is my husband's aunt. So an aunt can often be to do with it's not a brother or a sister, so it's probably not to do with a relationship to another person. But aunt can often, so it could be somebody who's related to you but senior and across, if you see what I mean.
There could be
you have a
about that
relationship. Yeah, it could be. I think just while we're still on the symbolic stuff, I think it could be to do with another church, because aunts and uncles, it's often sort of like a related church. If you had two churches that were closely aligned to each other, if your father and mother have a relative, it could be a church, but it could be it's the father's. The father's aunt. So you'd have to think a bit more along those lines about what the relationship might be. I mean, I suppose the big question is, does this person actually have lung cancer and you just don't know about it? I mean, you would be asking that, wouldn't you? And like, what advice could we help with in that regard?
I mean, it could be a prophetic dream. I dreamt once that a friend had died because they were being treated for cancer, but it wasn't the cancer that had killed them, it was the treatment. And actually, it was pretty 3 days later we found out that this had actually happened to a friend's husband. He'd gone for cancer treatment. He'd reacted extremely badly to one of the cocktail drugs in the cancer treatment, and he has a specific genetic thing, and they had to rush him to hospital. And I'd actually seen this in a dream, so it could be that, but obviously it might not be that. And so it's always going back to God and saying, what are you showing me here, God? What are you drawing my attention to? There was an interesting dream about somebody trying to warn you about the dangers of smoking, but it was weird because they had weird eyes.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to talk to that a bit before we finish this.
Just again, smoking. We've kind of picked up on a few things. We often say if somebody has a wacky idea, what have you been smoking? It's like, what drugs are you on? So it can be to do with like wacky ideas, like where did that come from kind of stuff. But I did have a dream. I kind of talked about it, I think a couple of weeks ago, where I was in a space, in a room, and part of the furniture of this room was a machine designed to illustrate the dangers of smoking. And I kind of have a pretty good idea that it was within the space related to a certain group of people. Within this group of people, they were quite focused on managing sin and discovering if you'd been snared in any way, and looking for snares in the spiritual life and in the prophetic and avoiding them. So a lot of it was about, don't do this, don't do that, avoid this, avoid that, there's this trap, there's that trap, look out for this deal with this spirit in this way when you find it. It was quite kind of negative stuff, and that was what was represented by a machine which is designed to illustrate the dangers of smoking, right? It's kind of that sort of sin focus in others and in yourself.